speaking to the viewers, telling them about the Bitcoin ETF approval by the SEC. What is in it for you and I? You know, the viewers out there will want to know, how can they participate? They've seen a lot of jubilation already during the approval on the 10th of January on the ETF. There were a lot of jubilation in the United States, but most people want to understand, how can it be of benefits to them, to parastatals, government parastatals, individuals? How can we benefit from this ETF approval? And in a layman's explanation, please, I want you to explain what the ETF Bitcoin approval is to start with.
All right. The ETF Bitcoin approval, it's the approval from the U.S. Security Exchange Commission to ensure that investors can be able to invest from investment managers that are being approved to, take Bitcoin as an asset that can be invested in. So this approval is actually essential in the area that we can see that it provides certain number of investors into the crypto space. This is like, let's say, this is like opening the floodgates to investors all around the world to be able to invest in Bitcoin as an asset. So basically, ETF means the exchange traded fund. An exchange traded fund.
Please, can you repeat that again? The exchange traded
fund. Exchange traded fund. That is like the word, the acronym of ETF.
ETF.
So, yeah, an exchange traded fund works by offering investors exposure to the performance of a particular asset or groups of assets. We are going to use Bitcoin as a case study, to understand how the ETF works. So, how do these ETF work using Bitcoin as a case study? Number one, the creation of the ETF. An asset management firm creates the ETF specifying the underlying asset or index it aims to track. In the case of a Bitcoin ETF, the underlying asset is a Bitcoin. For this case, the underlying
asset is a Bitcoin.
It is a Bitcoin. So we are using Bitcoin as a case study here. So when you create the ETF, you understand that there's an underlying asset that you want to build, you want to create an asset management firm around it. Although you might have an asset management firm already, but you just want to, bring another underlying asset to the portfolio you already have, which Bitcoin is a case study. So after you have identified this, then you have to get approval from the SEC. And this approval,
you have to get approval from where?
The SEC. You have to get approval from the SEC. The SEC
the Security Exchange Commission.
Yeah. The asset management firm submits the ETF proposal to the Security and Exchange Commission for approval. So once approved, the ETF can be listed and traded on a stock exchange. It means that the ETF can be listed and be traded on a stock exchange. So when the approval has been sorted out, the next step, I'm taking you through the stepwise manner of how an ETF works. So the next step is the custodian and the creation redemption process. The custodian and the creation redemption process. So the
The
ETF typically
custodian and the
involves,
creation and redemption process.
yes, the
All right.
ETF typically involves a custodian, a financial institution responsible for holding the actual Bitcoin that the ETF represents. The custodian
Oh,
plays a crucial role in the creation and redemption process.
okay.
So now we'll look at the areas of the authorized participants, the APs. You know, I would dive deep into what the APs are. The authorized participants, they are large institutional investors. These APs are large, they are usually large institutional investors. They work with the ETF issuer to create or redeem shares of the ETF. So these
All right.
APs, they are like, how will I put it? They are like the agency that works with the asset management firm that actually invest their money into these assets and makes it easy for investors. It makes it easy for investors to create and redeem shares of an ETF. So because
Okay.
they are the, let me just put it in this way. We have the producers, we have the wholesalers, we have the retailers, and we have the consumers. That is like chain of production, you know. So now the APs, they act as the retailers.
Okay.
APs act as the reseller in this
Sorry,
chain
sorry, sorry,
because
sorry. You said the APs. The APs, who are the APs?
the authorized participant,
Okay, the authorized
we did,
participants act as the
yeah,
retailers.
yeah, they act as both the wholesalers and the retailers at the same time.
Okay,
Let me
okay,
put it in that manner. So look at the wholesalers
okay,
as people that invest in the bulk of the production line, and the retailers that as those that sell in bits. So this AP in the chain of command, let's say the producers are the ETF holders. That means the asset management firm that we are looking at,
okay,
buying their shares. You know, these people have already gotten approval now. All they'll do is, you know, they are the one that are at the production center of these ETF shares. So they produce the shares that the APs, can play a role of both the wholesalers and the retailer. You know, the APs,
okay.
they play both the role of the wholesalers and retailers, but
And the
basically
retailers.
we see them,
All right.
uh, we will see these APs as the wholesalers, basically, because
Okay.
they are typically large institutional investors that bring money and buy the bulk from the hands of the ETF asset managers. Then what they do is they buy the box and break it down that retailers can be able to buy and resell from them, or they sell directly to the investors. They
I
sell
get
the
it.
shares that they have acquired directly. So these authorized participants, they have load of money that they used to do business at the center, at the heart. So when people are saying we want to sell our shares, they buy it from them. When people say that I want to buy
Sorry,
shares, they
can
buy
I
it
can
from
I
them.
ask a question? Can I ask a question? In other words,
Yes.
are you saying that the ETF approval represents the Bitcoin shares in the market?
The ETF approval represents the legitimacy of buying ETF as a share in the market.
Okay, the legitimacy of buying ETF as a share in the market.
in the market. Yes.
So, in other words, it's just like stock right now, like a stock.
Now, officially, Bitcoin has become a stock.
Whoa.
It has become an
All
asset.
right.
It is being
All right.
identified as an asset. That is why
Okay.
it is proposed to receive an approval from the ECC so that it will be traded like an asset.
Like an asset. It's a mainstream asset right now. So
Right
with the
now,
fear people usually have, when you talk about Bitcoin, a lot of people see it as something that has to do with scam. So officially, is a mainstream asset that can be traded as a stock in the market.
yes, it can be traded as a stock in the market. So, looking at this process that I'm outlining for us as we follow, the authorized participants, you know, then, they work with the ETF issuer to create and redeem shares
Okay.
of the ETF. When the creation of these shares is being done, the APs delivers the Bitcoin to the custodian in exchange for a new ETF shares. So
Oh,
shares, when redeeming shares, the AP to the issuer and receive the equivalent value in Bitcoin.
okay.
Like the AP is like an intermediary between, okay, it's an intermediary between the how do I put it again? What word do I use? The ETF issuer. BlackRock
It's
is an ETF.
the AP, meaning the authorized participants, are like an
Yes,
intermediary between the
yes,
ETF issuer and the retailers.
yes.
Okay. All right.
The AP delivers Bitcoin to the custodian in exchange for the new ETF shares that is going to be
Okay.
sold to the retailer.
That is going to be sold to the retailers.
Yes.
All right.
The people that buys these shares, they are investors. They get the
Yeah.
shares, they get the shares from the retailer. The popular retailer we know, they are the NYSE and the NASDAQ. Uh, they are like where you can get these stocks. You know, they are stock exchange
Okay.
platforms. So
Okay.
investors can now buy and sell these shares throughout the trading day, just like stock. You know,
Okay.
the role of the AP is to mitigate with the issuer. Let me go about it again because it might be confusing for people that
Yes, it's a bit
don't.
confusing. I want it in such a way that every single person who isn't into cryptocurrency, who stumbles on this video, or those who are viewing us can understand the breakdown of the ETF and how an ordinary man on the streets in the US or even any other part of the world can participate in the ETF.
Normally, as
Okay,
I was saying, normally
okay,
the ETF
okay,
issuer, the
okay.
ETF issuer works with an authorized participant, you know, to create
Okay.
and redeem
Can you
shares.
give me an example of an ETF issuer? Can I become an ETF issuer?
Yeah, ETF issuers are those ones that applied for the approval that they want to
Okay,
trade.
okay. Those that apply
The,
for the approval. So we are looking at
yes,
institutions, as
those
ETF
ones are
issuers.
called, yes, they are called the
All right.
ETF issuers.
All
You
right.
understand? They
All
are the
right.
one that asks
Yeah.
for the approval so that they will be able to
Okay.
issue ETF. And their
Okay.
role is
Okay.
to the role that these ETF issuers and this AP have together. I say the ETF issuers, they are like the um they are like the producer, and this ETF and this AP are like the wholesalers. You know, what they do
Okay.
is that when they are creating shares, when the ETF issuer is creating shares, the AP delivers Bitcoin to the custodian. That
Okay.
is the ETF. The ETF issuer is also the custodian. You know, in
Okay.
exchange for the ETF shares. So look at this in this way: the
All
ETF,
right.
the AP, and the ETF issuers. The ETF issuers, they are like the producers. The active participants, they are like the wholesalers. You know.
Okay.
Now, the active participants, their role is to invest in Bitcoin
Okay.
and exchange that Bitcoin to shares of ETF.
Okay.
The AP delivers Bitcoin to the custodian in exchange for the new ETF shares. When redeeming the shares, when creating the shares, sorry, when creating the shares,
Okay.
the AP will get Bitcoin, give it to the custodian, which is the ETF issuer, and the ETF issuer will give them ETF shares on that Bitcoin that was exchanged. That is when they are creating shares. But when they are redeeming shares, the AP returns the ETF shares to.
All right.
All right. We are actually discussing about the role of APs and the ETF issuers, which also, like, they are the custodian of the assets. So when the authorized participant is interacting with the ETF issuers, there are two interactions there. They are creating shares and redeeming shares. So creating shares is the part of them to create a share value, and redeeming shares is the part where they redeem a share value. So this AP, when creating, sorry, can you give me some minutes more? I want to pick a call. Can you give me some minutes?
We are good.
All right. The authorized participant role in the ETF issue is to, get Bitcoin, exchange the Bitcoin for shares, then uh, the the shares will be sold out to people. So when the shares is needed to be recovered, you know, what is happening is that they are going to sell the shares back to the ETF issuer. Then the ETF issuers will now give the value of the Bitcoin back to the APs, and the APs will settle on the exchange. So that is the job of the APs in the creation of the ETF shares and the redemption of the ETF shares. So now we will look at the market trading, also another area. Once the ETF shares is being created, the ETF shares are listed on the stock exchange, for retail purposes, just like the NYSE, that is the New York Stock Exchange, or the NASDAQ. Investors can buy and sell these shares throughout the trading day, just like their stocks. So another areas we
All
look
right.
in the ETF area is the arbitrage mechanism. The creation and the redemption process is facilitated by APs. So it helps the ETF market price in line with the net asset value, that is the NAV, of its underlying assets. So let's say in this area now, we are saying that the arbitrage mechanism is the one that lets um, the ETF to be profitable because they are
Okay. The
monitoring.
arbitrage, sorry, the arbitrage mechanism makes the
Yes,
ETF to be profitable.
yes, in the
Okay.
sense that they are monitoring the value of the asset price outside, and they are looking for a place where they will be able to get the asset cheaper to get more inflow when they can have more buying power. You understand? And
All
also
right.
try and discharge those assets. So in the trading of those assets, that's where it is they generate profit, and they also there is always a possibility that they will be incurring loss. But with time,
Okay.
because it is a stock market and people are involved in the buying and selling, it's going to generate, at least it's going to be profitable in the long run. So
Okay.
if the ETF is trading at a premium, if the ETF is trading at a premium or discount to the net asset value, authorized participants can engage in arbitrage to profit from the differentials,
Okay.
differentials, helping to keep the price in check. So this is like I'm further explaining what I said earlier. It's an open area for them to make profit since there is always a margin in price across border. So
Okay.
we also look that in ETF processes, there's also fees and expenses. So the ETF issuer charges a fee for managing the fund, and these fees are typically expressed as a percentage of the assets under management, the assets under management. So the asset under management, they might decide to charge about 0.2% as their managing fee. So
All right.
imagine that we are having hundreds of billions of dollars in investment, ETF investment. If
Okay.
they are charging about 0.2%, it means they are charging in in billions, also in millions of dollars. For you controlling an asset worth of billions, hundreds of billions, and you are charging 0.2, it means that you are charging in hundreds of millions for a fee on this ETF. So it's highly profitable for the ETF issuer as as they charge fees and expenses on this,
On management.
and those fees covers for the operational cost of the ETF. So the seventh thing that we can
Okay.
see, in the ETF using Bitcoin as case study is that some ETF, particularly equity-based ones, may distribute dividends to shareholders based on the income generated by the underlying assets. However, Bitcoin itself doesn't generate income like stocks. So the Bitcoin ETF may not pay dividends to traditional in the traditional sense. You know,
Okay.
Bitcoin is, I don't know how we put it. Like if you buy Apple shares now, you know that Apple generate these shares to build their corporation, and as
Yes,
their
due to their
corporation is being
production.
built,
Yes.
yeah, they have production line and they are making profit. So out of the profit that they are generating, it's traditional that you distribute dividends to shareholders. That
Okay.
is actually, you know, that's like a tradition that you distribute dividends to shareholders.
So shareholders, yeah.
So, yeah, in this case, Bitcoin is not like a production company or a manufacturing company. You know, Bitcoin is more or less a currency that, let's say, for example, gold. Gold is a currency. Gold do not pay dividends on the holders, on their ETF holders, you know, because gold only, if you invest in gold as shares, you only get profitable with time based on the
Yeah.
value of the gold that you
Due
bought
to
when
the,
it
the,
was
the,
low.
the increase in
Yeah,
value of the gold.
due to the increase in value of it. So you're
All
actually
right.
trading the stocks for a particular margin that you sell it to take profit. So when it will drop, some people will buy into the stock and trade it when it will be expensive to take profit. So that is the kind of precedence that we have for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not a stock that pays dividends to the shareholders like
Okay.
the equity-based uh, counterpart of stocks. So the last thing that we will see in this is the tax consideration. The tax consideration. Investors in ETF may be subjected to capital gains. Taxes when they sell their shares for profit. Tax implication can vary depending on the jurisdiction and the investors' individual circumstances.
Okay.
So, considering this, some people might not want to directly invest in the shares because I don't want to pay capital gain tax on my
I
profit.
see.
You know, so we see that in the case of ETF, there's always capital gain tax, and that is the reason why the approval is being considered. Because if it's going to bring a ton load of money into the economy, then it means that the American government wants a piece of that. So it's part of the consideration that will enable them um, to approve the Bitcoin ETF.
Okay,
In
because
the
it
case of the
definitely is going
recent,
to have a positive effect to their economy as
yeah,
well. All right.
to their economy. So
Okay.
the recently approved spot Bitcoin ETF mentioned in the news, various asset management firms like BlackRock, Grayscale, and Vanguard and other has received the SEC approval for their Bitcoin focused ETF. So this ETF aims to provide investors with exposure to the price movement of Bitcoin without having to directly own and store the cryptocurrency themselves. So the ETF structure allows for easier buying and selling on traditional stock exchange, providing a more accessible investment vehicle for a broader range of investors that kind of have fears that what if I lose my wallet? It's not something I can transfer to my children when I have lost access to my wallet. It's not something that I can recover when I've lost access to my wallet. It is not something I can lay my hands on when it is compromised based on security. All those questions that are coming from people that are looking at investing in Bitcoin on a long term are definitely answered with this spot ETF. So for the case of those that you like it in the share style that you want to pass down to your generation unborn, this is an easy route for you to
Okay.
acquire
The
it.
ETF is an easy route to still have your Bitcoins and pass them to your generation without having any
Yeah.
form of fear that you could lose your dApps wallet, or you could lose your recovery phrase, or you could lose anything that has to do with that investment. This is very good.